Clare McHugh was born in London before moving stateside. She graduated from Harvard. She's worked the beat as a newspaper reporter and magazine editor. She's taught high school history, reviewed books for high-profile pubs like the Wall Street Journal, and even raised 2 kids. So why not throw a novel into the mix? A Most English Princess is her debut book, and we're thrilled to hear her talk about it this evening. In conversation with Clare this evening is Mariah Fredericks. Death of an American Beauty is the 3rd in her compelling series set in Gilded Age, New York. You can't think of a better duo to spend a Friday night with. Thank you both for joining us this evening. So without further ado, Clare, Mariah, take it away.
Thank you. So Clare, I remember, are we on? Clare, I remember when we met and you said you have a novel coming out, and I said, that's fabulous. What is it about? And you said it's about Queen Victoria's eldest daughter, Vicky. And I said, I can't believe this. I've wanted somebody to write this book for 10 years. It's such a great story. And you were kind enough to give me an early copy of it. And it was such a wonderful, fabulous book. And I'm so excited that we get to do this.
That's really nice of you to say all of that, Mariah. And I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. You know, everyone's on Zoom so much. So to make an extra time to come and talk about books with us. And it was true that we had a mind meld when we met. It may be an eccentric person's activity, writing historical novels, but I really enjoyed writing my first one. And I mean, you're 4 in almost. So we have that in common.
Absolutely. How did you get interested in Vicky as a subject?
You know, I'm an enthusiastic follower of history of the specifically German and British history of the 19th century. And you can't follow and read about that period without knowing about Vicky. The thing being that she played a pivotal role between the 2 countries. It's kind of been forgotten now. Or well, maybe some people remember that the British royal family is very, very German. And first they came from Hanover, and then Prince Albert, Victoria's husband, came from Saxe-Coburg. And then Vicky married into the Prussian royal family, and the Prussians took over Germany, and thus the Kaiser, the evil Kaiser we all know about, he is Vicky's son. But the thing about Vicky that really spoke to me was a really personal thing. I hate to admit it. She was a bossy older sister. Now I was a bossy older sister, and I know all the virtues of the character and all the downfalls. And I'm being a little bit facetious, but it's true that she had this position in the family, and then her father sent her on a mission, and with all the best of intentions, and introduced her to the man she would marry and go with him, the Crown Prince of Prussia, to Prussia, to make Prussia just like Britain. Oh my goodness, what could go wrong?
Well, the thing that is so fascinating about Vicky, I mean, in addition to the events that she's involved in, is she's a very admirable person, and she has definite blind spots that had a real impact on history. She's very human. And, you know, we tend to, I think in historical fiction, often like our heroines to be flawless. I really loved the way you portrayed Vicky as such an eminently sympathetic, admirable person, but it was an honest portrayal. How did you balance all that out in addition to the bossy system?
Well, you know, one thing that I noticed, I used to be a magazine editor, and magazines are commercial products. The idea with a magazine is to sell as many magazines as you can. And I was under no illusions that as a first-time novelist, I would sell a lot of novels, but copies of my book. But I wanted to pick a topic that I thought would have broad appeal. And the British royal family does have broad appeal. And like I said, I knew about this history. What I noticed, though, when I read some other historical novels was that a modern audience is craving for women in the past to have agency. And they often did not have a lot of agency. Vicky was lucky in that she had a position of some influence because she was the member of she was Queen Victoria's daughter and she married an important prince. But even she was limited in what she could achieve. But what I found about her was the opportunity to have an interpretation on her that I thought other people had overlooked. You know, dry biographies are by nature rather dry. They're a recitation of what happened to someone. And when you read between the lines of Vicky's life, married at 17 to the love of her life, yet gave birth at 18 to a crippled son, lost another son, lost out in some political battles. Mm-hmm. I thought there was room in this account of her life to show her in the way that I imagined these things felt to her. Mm-hmm. But, however, she does, you know, make missteps like all of us. Right. I did find in my research that many of the people who've written about Vicky are men, and I feel for that reason they have a difficulty really fully empathizing with her. So, like most historical fiction, while I hewed very close to the facts, it's a proposition for the reader. This is my take on Vicky. Taking everything that I've read about her and trying to imagine what it felt like to be her. And thus, I certainly had to point out that she was not always the ideal mother, and she didn't always read the room. But what had been left out of the accounts of her life was how much she dared to try to make a difference. And, you know, in some ways she failed through no fault of her own. But I think people respond not only to stories about women who have agency or try to have agency, but women who try to make the life that they find better for their family and for the country she landed in. Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know, there are a few like prevailing myths about Vicky, aren't there? I mean,
yes.
There's a way historians used to talk about her. What was the popular image when you
Well, her? You know, because the Kaiser, her son, turned out badly, you know, it's very fashionable to blame the mother. Freud was a big blamer of the mother. And when people tried to look back at what had gone wrong in Germany after its unification under Prussia, under actually Vicky's father-in-law, the first Kaiser, also Wilhelm, when they tried to think, why did Germany come together in this militaristic way? And why was the person who had really the most power in the society, Vicky's son, her husband died after only 99 days on the throne, what could explain this? And one very popular theory was that Vicky, a woman of 18, like I said, when Wilhelm was born, and he had a lame arm, that she, the mother, didn't accept him the way he was and was always trying to improve him. And that it was her fault that he turned out to be a kind of nasty fellow, because she wasn't as accepting of all parts of him. You know, we all know enough about parenting that it takes two. And I think that Wilhelm not only had a handicap, he also had a very difficult personality. And he was also brought up in a time when, after Germany was unified by Prussia, they were all, you know, giddy with nationalistic fervor. I think what went wrong in Germany and why it sort of went off the tracks and played a huge role in causing World War I has much more to do with Vicky's enemy, Otto von Bismarck.
I was just about to say, it's not the mother, it's the father figure. Now, he's sort of this towering figure that you know you ought to know more about, or I think a lot of people feel that they ought to know more about. And I learned a lot about him through your books. And I think that the scenes with Bismarck and Vicky are among my favorites. And look, they're so unpredictable. There's a nice charged relationship and a power battle going on there. Were those scenes really fun to write?
Yes.
Yes.
They were the funnest, plus the love scenes, because I do think, so what happened to Vicky essentially was that her father, Prince Albert, who was a German, he wanted his country to be just like Britain, a constitutional monarchy. And in the 1850s, when Vicky was a teenager, all the Germans were fighting with each other about how to make a new nation and how it would come together. And Albert basically married Vicky off to the Prussian Crown Prince Fritz, because he thought, looking at the situation, that Prussia was the most likely of all the German states to be able to make this happen, because they were Prussians were the most powerful. Prussia was the biggest German state. What Albert didn't live to see was that it actually took not a monarch to bring it together, but a very canny statesman. Yes, Otto von Bismarck was an aristocrat, but more than that, he was just a really smart guy. Henry Kissinger, who wrote a lot about Bismarck, I think kind of admired Bismarck, said, you know, Bismarck should be likened to Lenin. Lenin created a new country in Russia from the left. Bismarck created a new country in Germany, out of the German states, from the right. He's seriously really conservative and very militaristic. And so, you know, Vicky and Fritz had all these dreams of how the Germans would all play together nicely and the country would kind of spring up. And instead, Bismarck made 3 wars: Prussia first against Denmark, second against the Austrians, third against France. Every one of these wars consolidated Germany more. And then 150 years ago, this winter, the Germany that basically Bismarck wanted came to be, and it was born. And Bismarck, who was although he liked Vicky and he admired her because she was very clever and very lively for a princess. He was used to very subdued German princesses and no one who didn't wouldn't speak their mind. Vicky always spoke her mind. So what happened was, although he admired her, he wanted to sideline her because the ideas that she had about Germany, which is it should be a liberal democracy when the parliament had a lot of power. Bismarck, no. Parliament should be sidelined and it really should be run with a strong executive, which happened to be Bismarck. Well, it didn't really happen, right? He made himself that. The issue is that Bismarck built a car that only he could drive. Only he could keep Germany together in the way that he had set it up. But then when Vicky's son became Kaiser at age 27, he wanted to do it himself. So he fired Bismarck, and that's when things really went wrong. You know, you can criticize Bismarck for being very conservative, but you can also say, well, he could do it, whereas Wilhelm the Kaiser couldn't.
Right, right. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking this story takes place on so many levels. You have the domestic level, you have the political level, the court intrigue, there's military history going on. How did you keep track of all the varying strands of this story?
And we're going to have to also ask some of the people who are in the audience who've read the book, which was the political strand too much? I really wanted to try to do all of it. I wanted to, because I didn't think Vicky's story and Vicky's struggles made sense if you didn't know the political environment, you didn't know what was at stake. Otherwise, it would be just some rich people arguing with each other because she moved to Prussia and nobody really liked her because she was this pert little English princess telling them what to do. And, you know, there was a lot of bad feeling and arguing within the family. Well, that's not interesting enough unless you understand that actually the future of Europe was hanging in the balance. I mean, they didn't really understand that either, but it was, I had to put the history in and the politics and the military history, because one of the reasons the Prussians won all these wars that Bismarck started was they always had the best guns, they always had the biggest guns, and they always had the most guns. And this was something actually that Vicky's husband, who was really a great guy in many, many ways, he, like many Prussians, was extremely interested in armaments. So even I had to learn something about armaments.
Did you get to tour fabulous, fabulous places? Did you do on-site research?
I am very sad to say that I wanted to go to Vicky's last palace, which is actually now a hotel in Frankfurt that anyone can go to.
Ooh.
However, the deadline for my book moved up, and I thought, well, I'll go in the spring. And we know what happened in the spring. COVID happened, so I didn't get to go. I'm talking to one of Vicky's great-grandsons, who now owns that hotel, the Landgraf of Hesse, and I'm planning to go, I hope, in the summertime.
Oh my God, that's fabulous. I can't believe that. Her great-grandson?
Yeah, she has many, because she had 8 children, so they all got around. In fact, some of them live in England, and some of them live here. One of the architects of the Hudson Yards Garden and Park is a woman named Tatiana von Prussen, and she is Vicky's 3-time great-granddaughter.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you think that these people are far away, but really in the, 150 years wasn't that long ago. And it's interesting to think about how this woman tried to cope with a foreign country, but also a constantly shifting political ground.
Right. It is, it's a family story. When we talk about great-grandchildren, and another fascinating aspect is I can't think of any other era in history where the issue of parenting comes to the forefront as much. And Vicky was a fascinating parent. Her own parents are not easy, Victoria and Albert. If you were her therapist, what would you have to say about them?
Well, to go back just a second, you're so right. This is the problem with a hereditary monarchy, that people inherit influence and power. The problem with this is that then you're stuck with these people in this genetic roll of the dice. And, sometimes it goes better than other times. And that's really true, that Vicky in some ways had a very nice childhood. Her mother was the Queen of England, who was married to a man that she loved desperately, Prince Albert, the Prince Consort. They were very respectable people. They wanted to, Victoria's grandfather and her uncles were Georgian kings, and they were always, keeping mistresses, going to casinos, living the high life. Victoria and Albert did not want to do that. They wanted to restore a sense that the British royal family was upstanding and family values were at the fore. So Vicky benefited from that. She had an excellent education at home. She was taken all the time to all over Britain to meet interesting people, to see the new technology that was coming to the fore in industrial England. And she had 8 brothers and sisters. She got on well, actually, with all of her siblings, although there was the usual kind of jockeying for who's best at this. However, like all parents, Victoria and Albert had their faults. If I was Vicky's therapist, I would say, now listen, don't take it so seriously that your mother is so emotional and will unload on you all the time. And for example, when Vicky was a teenager, Queen Victoria very much resented that Albert, her husband, seemed to prefer Vicky to his own wife and say, well, Vicky's so smart, and imply that Queen Victoria wasn't quite as smart as her own daughter. So of course, this caused a lot of jealousy, and Victoria could be very really nasty to Vicky about some of this stuff. So I would say, and then after they were separated and Vicky went off to live in Germany, her mother would write her these long letters telling her, you must do it this way, and how dare you not write to me 3 times a week, and you're a bad daughter. Vicky Schrick, I'd say, you know what? she always behaves like this. You can't take it that seriously. Do what you can. You're living your own life. Right. But, you know, Vicky also had a lot of Oedipal problems because she was the apple of Prince Albert's eye. And Prince Albert, you know, thought she was just the greatest thing in shoe leather. And so, you know, in that way, in some ways, that was distorting. She wasn't challenged enough at home that, you know, before you have an opinion, maybe you should, you know, ask a few other people who might be experts in this. There was a tendency for Vicky all through her life to, you know, go forward with her opinions before she really thought enough about it. And I think it was partly that, you know, Albert made her feel so confident that she sometimes wasn't sensitive enough to the way her opinions might strike other people, or how she needed to think about things a little more. And then, of course, because she was so devoted to her father, she did what he wanted and went to Germany and tried to spout always his line. As Vicky Shrink, I would say, you know what? Your father and you are separate people. You're the one who's living in Prussia. Use your own judgment. Don't, you know, rush to him for all the answers, or depend on things that he has said years ago when circumstances were different. Even when Prince Albert died, which was devastating for Vicky, she couldn't let go of his ideas, but he didn't really anticipate how Germany would change and how Bismarck would come to the forefront and how these wars. So poor Vicky. Poor Vicky. You know, the parenting that she got was hard. And then, you know, she really wanted her son, despite his lame arm, to be up to the responsibilities that were coming down the pike. And she didn't really understand how to encourage him. She was the kind of mother who William would write letters to him saying, "Darling Mom, I'm having a lovely time on my holiday." She would send the letters back with the spelling and grammar mistakes pointed out. You know, it was no wonder that Wilhelm later felt that he was always a disappointment to her. And it really was her job more to show him how to be responsible without always saying that you have to measure up to this and that. You know, it's funny that shows like The Crown also reveal how even today, or in recent years, the dynamics within the royal family can spill over into their public roles.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Wow. Do you have any hopes for a Crown-like adaptation?
Oh, it's my dream. Yeah. And I've been writing to some German actors and producers I know, and I start my letters with, "There is more to German history than the Nazis." But if you look at what's produced, you think it's always been Nazis. Why not do a dramatic series about the English princess coming to the Prussian court and what happens to her? There is a great show that some of the older members of our audience might remember that the BBC did called The Fall of Eagles. And that is one segment of Vicky's story, but Vicky's a real drip in that. One of the things I wanted to show with my book is that Vicky was neither a victim nor a drip, even though a lot of hard things happened to her.
Speaking of hard things, one of the things I first knew about Vicky was that since it's the Victorian era, she had 8 children, of course, not all of them made it to adulthood. And her favorite child, I think, died at the age of 2. Yes. And it's sort of a famously poignant scene of history. And even people who couldn't stand her said, "Oh, okay, we do actually feel bad for her." Now, I'm actually also now writing a historical that involves the death of a child. It's very hard to write these things.
Terrible. And I felt myself unequal to the task. And you know, I went back to her letters. So she'd had 3 children in rapid succession. She had Wilhelm, a sister for Wilhelm, Charlotte. Then she had another son called Henry. She had 3 children before she was 22, and she was not allowed to breastfeed any of the first 3 children because it was thought in the Prussian court and also by Queen Victoria to be something that only cows did. You did not feed your own children if you were a member of the nobility, and you always gave them to wet nurses. She, in this way, was very independent-minded, and from the beginning wanted to breastfeed her own children, but again, was told no. However, by the time she got to be 23 and she was pregnant for the 4th time, she let everybody know, you know what? I'm raising this child the way I wanted to raise it. And he was a very sweet little boy. He was born at a time, his name was Sigismund, which means victory, or it's a sort of variation on victory. And it was to commemorate the Prussian victory in the first of the 3 wars that Bismarck started, in which her husband, Fritz, was the leading general and very successful. So they had a lot to celebrate in the fall of 1864, when this baby was born. Fritz had come through the war in one piece. That they had victory, and they had this cute little son, and she said, you know what, I'm doing it my way. And for 3 months, she was able to take care of the baby herself and nurse the baby, and she loved this cute little thing. And she, you know, she has this Oedipal issue, so she thought, you know what, this is my father reborn, you know, and then actually 2 years later, when the boy was almost 2, she'd had another baby, this one called Victoria, but Sigismund was still a favorite. And when Fritz, her husband, left for the Second War against Austria, a week later, the boy came down with a high fever and died within 6 days of meningitis, something they could do nothing about, right? And she thought that Fritz would come back for a funeral. I mean, she was just devastated. And I tried, you know, I went to the letters that she wrote to her mother to try to see if I could try to evoke her state of mind. And I did use some of the phrasing, but it was very hard, and it made me very sad. And it reminded me of what a better world we live in. Not only do fewer children die, especially of these kind of diseases, also, you know, a child like Wilhelm, her first, a mother like Vicky would have been encouraged to accept that handicap naturally. Instead, she kept thinking, oh my God, and the child that I still have has this big flaw. There was a lot of craziness thinking. And I do try to bring that about and hope that people could sympathize, even though it's not a modern attitude.
Mm-hmm. Were her letters like your primary source of research, or what were?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. You know, it's as the book begins, my novel begins with how those letters were saved, because her son wanted those letters, which was actually a 2-sided correspondence. It was the letters she had sent to her parents, primarily her mother, and the letters that her parents had written back to her. At the time of her death, she had all the letters together in Germany, because she was thinking about writing her own memoir, but then she got sick with cancer and was not able to write them. So she asked a British friend of hers, really a secretary to her brother who'd come to visit, to secret these letters out of Germany, because she knew that once she was dead, her son would want them burned. So she made sure that correspondence got out of Germany, and it's been a historical resource for historians ever since. It's 8,000 letters, 4,000 that she wrote to her mother and 4,000 that her mother wrote back to her. And after some, you know, they were hidden by this courtier, his name is Ponsonby, for 10 years. And then after the war, he wanted to publish them, and he was able to publish them. And then he gave Vicky's letters back to her nephew, who was then King George V, and they've been at Windsor ever since. But the letters that Queen Victoria wrote to Vicky belonged to her German family, and they wanted them back. And so now those letters live in Schloss Fulda, which is a place in central Germany. I wanted to go there and see the letters, but the German librarian wrote to me and said, oh, you'll never be able to read Queen Victoria's handwriting. So I didn't go. But the letters have been published, or a very good fraction of them. So I used those. And I was very careful to use the kind of vocabulary that she used in the book, so that's to bring her to life accurately.
Yeah, we've talked about the importance of getting the voice right and the words right. Did you have a particular did you hear Vicky in your head?
Yes, I began to, I read those letters. So I read so much of the letters. I began to see what her syntax was. I think it's really hard as an American, to lose all American syntax. And so I had to, and I don't think I really did it 100%, but I was very helped by the fact that I read her letters, and then it wasn't that I lifted sentences from her, but I tried to get the way she would approach subjects. Because, a novel is actually a trip into somebody else's brain, especially a novel like this, which is written from a single point of view. Everything in the novel is told through the point of view of Vicky, except for the prologue, which is Ponsonby, and the epilogue, which is her son. But, you have to try to imagine not only her opinion of what happened to her, but how she would express it. So to the extent that I was successful, I'll be glad, but it's not easy. You agree, right? And when you're writing Jane, this is your main character, don't you are careful to try to imitate the way she would think in that time?
Yes. I mean, it's always a tricky thing because I can choose what her responses would be because she's not a real person. So I can update her views beyond what a woman of 1910s New York might think and feel a little bit, but it is important to me to not make her too ahead of her time. It's more interesting to me to explore why an intelligent, thoughtful, compassionate person might have slightly different views and what the arc of coming to a different view of the world looks like.
That, I agree with you totally. And that's, I think, the challenge and the fun of historical fiction, especially writing about historical women, because after all, they're human. And in that way, they're just like you and not me. And you can anticipate how they might react to things. But the mindset is not a modern mindset. So, and recently, a funny thing happened to me. A woman in Australia, an art historian, wrote to me and said that she had proof that Vicky later in her marriage had an affair with a man in Italy, and a connoisseur. And I said, I don't believe it. She might have had a crush on him, but she would have not she just wouldn't. I knew her well enough that line she couldn't cross because of the way she regarded sexual relations, really only for marriage. And when in the Prussian court, she saw some people behaving badly, and she's just like her mother. I mean, she's just excoriating about this bad behavior, and she never really changes, when she says this when she's 30 or 35, then she's still saying it when she's 60. I mean, this is a constant thing of her. And, she's very, she's a little starchy in her mindset.
Mm-hmm. And she and Fritz were very in love.
Yes. It's funny, the Fritz letters, which have recently been discovered, the letters between Vicky and Fritz, she is talking about in ways that we would not find explicit, but she's very, I can't wait to be resting on your chest again. I mean, she speaks in very physical terms about her great love for him. And he was a great guy. He was a more passive character than she was, and not as clever, but very loyal and kind and husband.
Oh, so she got lucky in some ways.
Yeah, yes, she actually absolutely did. Absolutely. Now, I'm sure we want to make sure that people who, there's Catherine probably coming back to say it's time to let other people talk.
Yes, we do have some questions from our audience, and I want to encourage everyone, if you have questions for Claire and Mariah, send them to the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. But a question here about Vicky's relationship with Albert. How old was Vicky when Albert died? Was she already Empress? I know you said that was something that she took really hard, but how could you talk a little bit more about how that?
Yes. This is very, very poignant to remember that Vicky had just turned 21 when Albert died, and she had been living in Prussia for 3.5 years. She was pregnant for the 3rd time. When she heard that he was very ill, she wanted to go immediately to Windsor, but the Prussian doctors advised against it. So she had to wait in her cold and lonely palace for this news that he had indeed succumbed. He was at that time himself only 42. So losing that key person so young and not having his advice anymore about how to deal with the Germans and the Prussians that she had to deal with was very hard. And I think it's part of the reasons why later she didn't always react, or she wasn't flexible in her thinking when sometimes it was required.
Yeah, I was going to ask if that affected sort of her performance in her job.
I think it did. I think it did. And you know, also there was this, I think there was this tendency that she and her mother both had. Albert was a great guy, but in their mind, he became a saint after his death. And they probably didn't turn enough attention to the next generation, as they were spending a lot of time in mourning and thinking about Albert, you know? It was a distraction in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And we touched a little bit on her relationship with Fritz at the very end of your conversation. But what did you think of writing love scenes? Do we have some romance in the book?
Well, the other day, somebody wrote to me and said, I gave this book to my 13-year-old and it was not appropriate. Well, I didn't think I could write about Vicky without writing about her intimate relationship with Fritz, because it was such a foundation of her life. It sustained her throughout her difficulties of getting used to living in Prussia. She often said, compared herself to other noblewomen and said that she was so lucky. And it continued for really their whole life together. Had this physical, you know, they had 8 children, and they were in fact made fun of in the Prussian court for their devotion to each other, which the Prussians, in their idiocy, considered middle class, a down market, oh, burgerlich. Why would anybody be like that? And people used to always say, why was it? If Fritz is so handsome, he could have any woman he wanted. But he was completely loyal to Vicky. I have a funny scene in the book in which the Emperor Napoleon actually sends a courtesan to Fritz's hotel room when Fritz is staying by himself in Paris. You know, the way, you know, I guess men in the 19th century thought, well, here's a nice woman you might like. And Fritz had a nice chat with her, but then sent her away. So, because her marriage was such a identity, really shaped her life, I thought I did have to write about their relationship. And the great thing was that I did keep it PG, despite the woman that saying that it wasn't right for her daughter. And I just kind of, it was really hard at first. I felt really self-conscious, and I kept wanting to show it to like girlfriends of mine. Do you think this is okay? But people kept saying, no, I want to read the whole thing. So I just had to go for it.
Just plowed forward. How much have you read about Fritz himself? What do you think of his character?
There is one really wonderful biography of Fritz that came out, I think in maybe 8 years ago, and it's called Our Fritz. Because when Fritz was such a successful general, the troops loved him, and he had a great touch with the men of the line. Like he had a wonderful memory for faces. He was very collegial with the generals, but he loved the troops. And in Germany, in Prussia, he was known as Unser Fritz, our Fritz. And an Anglo-German historian who now works at St. Andrews University in Scotland has written this wonderful biography of Fritz's. And I read it and really enjoyed it. And I sent my book to the professor, and I hope to meet up with him in Scotland if I decide I might think about writing a sequel. I don't know yet. But this book showed me that Fritz had some great strengths and some real weaknesses. His strengths were that he was loyal and true and very committed to his job. His weaknesses was he wasn't really very clever, and he tended to be passive when his parents were not nice to him. And so when his father would, you know, insult him, he'd sort of go into the corner and, you know, with his tail between his legs. And Vicky was saying, no, stand up for yourself. Say, that's not right. And you have to give me the responsibility now that, you know, I'm crown prince and things. So she was always telling him, fight, fight, fight. And he was often not able to. But he knew enough to rely on her advice and to seek her encouragement. He was also a little bit depressive, and the fact that she was always a very upbeat personality really helped him. So he married well. Of course, the very tragic thing about Fritz was he took his job as general of the troops and then later crown prince and the director of Berlin's museums very seriously. He represented Prussia brilliantly abroad. People would see him and think that, well, here is the Teutonic prince that we've all dreamed of. So he waited for many years to become German emperor, and he actually he got a throat cancer just when his father was dying, and he died 99 days after his father. So he was only on the throne, you know, for almost about 3 months. 1888 is the year of 3 Kaisers in Germany. It was Wilhelm, who was Vicky's father-in-law. It was Fritz, who was Vicky's husband, and then it was Wilhelm, her son. The throne changed over twice.
And you talked about writing a sequel. What would the sequel then cover? Well,
you know, I was interested. You know, I've also gotten some pushback about the book that it ends too soon and it ends on a high note. You know, I like a high note. And in 1871, when I end my book, there is an epilogue that takes place in 1940. But in 1871, when I end it, you know, things are looking quite rosy for Fritz and Vicky. Germany has come together under Prussian leadership. Now Fritz is home permanently. They've had, you know, 8 children. She can look forward to the future. She doesn't know what the future holds. However, and it took me 500 pages to get from her being a little child to being in 1871. And you know, the publishers don't want to publish much more than 500 pages for a novel. So if I did another novel, because people say, but you cut it off at an important part. If I did another novel, it would be about how Vicky reconciled herself to the tough things that happened to her. First, there was this long wait for the throne. And then when they actually ascended to the throne, it was for such a short period. And then she had 10 years of widowhood after Fritz died. And the more I've been looking at this, and the more I've heard from people like this woman in Australia, I realized that these are quite modern problems, you know, not getting a job you want, trying to find purpose somewhere else, you know, the early death of someone you love, and then, you know, reconciling yourself to a new life. And I think there's enough new material about how she did this, again, to show that she wasn't a victim and she wasn't someone to be pitied, although tough things happened to her. She made a lot of things in her life good. And so I would try to write a novel in which it would show the tragic arc of the final years of her life, but then how she coped with it, how she digested it, and all the great things she did for a lot of women in Germany. She started schools for young women. She took care of, she worked in orphanages and hospital settings. So there's a lot of good as well as the tragic. So I might write it called The 99-Day Empress.
If you were to advise other beginning writers, what would you say made Vicky the perfect subject for your first novel?
She hadn't been written before in a fictional treatment. That was number one. Number two, you know, writing a novel about somebody is a long process. I mean, maybe some people would be quicker than me. It took me 2 years. So you have to pick somebody, not only that other people haven't picked, but also that you can bear to spend 2 years with. That I used to think about Vicky when I heard song lyrics, like, and when I heard about other people's travails, like Hillary Clinton, I was thinking, oh, that's kind of Vicky-like. You know, I was constantly thinking about her. So I do think, listen, writing a novel is a really, 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 really fun thing to do. And I urge anyone who has the instinct to, the impulse to try. I know several people who here that in the audience I saw are great writers already. And I think a book-length project is fabulous to do. So you need a topic that other people haven't done. You need a topic that you're really sympathetic to, that you feel something connecting you, even though the person isn't perfect. And third, I do think you need to have some materials. You know, people write books about like Jesus's sister or something. I couldn't do that because there's not enough concrete material. But I like it, and there are some wonderful women in American history that haven't been written about enough. So those are my tips on finding people.
And Mariah, I'll ask the same question to you. You have your third book in your series coming out this week. What advice would you give to anyone who's starting out?
I agree with Claire. Find something that really fascinates you, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with it. I mean, this is for historical novels. When I used to write, I also think finding a question that bugs you. I used to write young adult novels, and the first one I wrote, I went back to the most painful memory of betrayal of a good friend, where I was the betrayer, and I still felt badly about it. And it was a great way to sort of unpack a lot of messy core feelings. So I'm very much a write what you enjoy, or find a world that you want to live in.
Yeah, but it's interesting what you say, Mariah, because I do think even when you're writing about historical character, even one that you who's real, as Vicky was, you bring a lot of yourself to it. Okay. I mean, I wasn't joking when the bossy older sister role, and it allowed me to to bring somebody alive on the page. You have to kind of be able to think, how would I feel if I was in this situation? And I'm always interested that Hilary Mantel writes about a man. I don't think I could, she writes about, of course, about Thomas Cromwell. I don't know if I could write about a historical man. Maybe you, Mariah.
I totally understand how she can write about Cromwell, because if you think about Cromwell in relation to Henry VIII, all the management of his tempers and his craziness, and the fact that Cromwell has power, but it can be taken away at any moment, as of course it is. In a weird way, he's in a feminine position vis-a-vis the king.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, Wolf Hall and those books are about office, machinations, political machinations, that, out of control in some ways. One of the other reasons why I liked writing about Bismarck was how he was like Trump and not like Trump. And while I was writing it during the years of Trump, it was a way of processing the politics around us.
Right.
Yeah, interesting that you bring up modern day parallels. We have a question. Do you see any parallels between Vicky's life and that of any current members of the royal family?
Yes. And I'll be interested if the audience agrees that there are Vicky aspects to the character of Meghan Markle. But of course, Meghan Markle had so much more freedom than Vicky ever did. So like Vicky, Meghan Markle married into a royal family, a foreign royal family. She's an American, it's a British royal family. Vicky's Brit, she marries into the Germans. But Meghan had a whole career before she became a royal bride. And she took really one look at what was going on and said, this is not for me. This is where it comes right into mindset. Vicky would never in a million years think, wow, this is really not going well in Prussia. And it wasn't going well, and think, okay, well, this is not working for me and I got to go home. Can you imagine? She would never do that. And in fact, when she was widowed, and I think her son he sidelined her, made her move from Berlin. People thought, oh, well, she'll go back to England. And even then she didn't, because when she married into this royal family, she committed. That was her mindset. It was all about duty. And however, to say something nice about Meghan Markle, I think it's really the current royal family's problem that they couldn't integrate this person, that, somehow it was their way or the highway. I mean, we could argue this. Mariah, are you pro Meghan or anti Meghan?
I'm sort of neither. I mean, I do wonder how it is that she was shocked that she was not married into this incredibly forward-thinking family. I think Harry wanted out, and he found someone who would get him out. She would have the fight with his family and with the British public that he wasn't able to have. So I think she gets a lot of the blame for something he wanted to do. I cannot stand the nickname Has. That upsets me. But
he did look happy for once, in that interview, which was broadcast, I think, last night or something. But yeah, so Meghan Markle is the one that reminds me of Vicky's situation. But two more different people you could never think of, Vicky and Meghan.
And you both, and I'll ask actually this question of both of you. Claire, you can answer first. You talked about needing to stand spending a lot of time with the character that you're going to be writing about, but do you actually need to like the person or the character that you're writing about?
It's a great question, because I really had to push myself to not like her, to go for nuance, because I found myself arguing with the biographers and thinking, well, this is not nice. Vicky, you're looking at it from the wrong perspective. If you saw it from Vicky's point of view, it would be like this. But I couldn't shy away. So while I was pro Vicky, I couldn't shy away from writing about her flaws. And I found that hard. But a good novel is like life. And it's not all shiny and sweet, and it's not on the same level all the time. It has to have ups and downs. And don't you agree, Mariah, that, if you write it too sweet, it's not interesting?
No. I have occasionally tried to take Jane further in making mistakes. In Death of an American Beauty, I actually wanted to have her do something unconsciously wrong. And she didn't know it was wrong, but the reader would react with horror. And my editor said, nope, I'm sorry. She's the point of view character. She's the series anchor. She cannot behave badly. And I did understand what she was saying. I think I can like a very wide range of people or feel deeply engaged and invested in people. If I think about a novel like Notes on a Scandal, where the narrator is truly unpleasant, I don't know if I can pull that off, but I do admire it.
Yes. Yes. You put a lot of yourself on the page. I mean, you can't help but. Right. And I found that I forced myself to, I read some letters that Vicky had written to her son that were so nasty. I couldn't believe it. I'm fighting with her now. Why did you say this? So I made myself put it in, because that's part of who she is. She would lose sight of how to be a good mother. And if I hadn't put that in, you wouldn't have the real Vicky. And I wanted so. But it was hard, because I on her side, and she would make me mad when she'd say bad things.
Okay, and so as a final question, we'll be wrapping up here this evening, but I want to ask both of you, in one sentence, what would you like readers to take away from your books? And Mariah, I'll actually let you go first. Not on the spot or anything.
Well, my series takes place in Gilded Age, New York. And the reason I write a murder mystery series is I want people to think about, how do we value life in America? Do we value some lives more than others? How do people come to the point of hating each other so much they'll take life? And what are the parallels between that Gilded Age and our Gilded Age? That wasn't one sentence, I apologize.
Oh, Mariah, but it was so good. I can't come anywhere close. I think I would like to say that I hope that my novel transports the reader back to a very complicated but very important moment in European history that determined a lot about the 20th century. And also, I wanted to take the reader into the head of somebody who very privileged, but who had many challenges and had to work hard, like women throughout history, to find purpose, to balance the domestic life with outside life, and to leave their mark on the world.
Beautiful.
Catherine, you bet you say that to all the authors.
No, just you. Well, and I can't think of a better note to end on, and I can't think of a better way to sell two incredible books. So, of course, Death of an American Beauty comes out next week, Mariah's book, and A Most English Princess is already out and available at all 3 of our stores. Links are in the chat. We have signed copies. Again, Claire, thank you so much for signing them for us. Those are available at Bookhampton. Grab yours before they're gone.
Go to independent bookstores, especially Bookhampton, a great store.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Congratulations to both of you. Thank you, Mariah, for joining us this evening. And we hope to see you all soon.
Super fun. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Bye.